Yeah. 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 Okay.
Hello and welcome to Afrospace with me, Dorothy Njemanze, and my co-host, Nyasha Grace. Afrospace is a show that brings you economics, or rather business, politics, lifestyle, and much, much more on the African continent of 55 countries. Today we have on our show our guest, Dorothy Njemanze, who is the co-founder of the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation. She's an actress, filmmaker, humanitarian, grassroots reorientator, and a feminist. Now, Dorothy has won many awards, and one of those awards is that she's a Commonwealth Youth Ambassador. She's also a winner of the 2014 Naija Diamond, which was presented to her by EbonyLife TV and Diamond Bank PLC. In 2016, she was part of the top outstanding young persons, which was presented to her from the Junior Chambers International, otherwise known as JCI Nigeria. And the big one, in 2018, she became the first West African to win the Ginetta Sagan Award, which was presented by Amnesty International, United States of America. And last year, in 2019, she was part of the International Visitor Leadership Program, the IVLP. Welcome to Afrospace, Dorothy.
Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Dorothy, I'm going to first start by asking you a bit of a personal question. If you are comfortable to tell us, we are aware that you've got a history, a personal history of sexual violence and rape, and the one that was a bit more public, where you were a victim of rape in the hands of the Nigerian police. Could you talk us through your life story and sexual violence and rape, and right up to obviously the case that you actually then won against the Nigerian police in that rape charge?
Okay, so I've been exposed to sexual violence, for so many years. Started as, a kid. The first time I was raped, I was 8 years old. It was a neighbor's house boy and his friends. And in my life, I've been raped way more than 20 times. There was a period I was, like trafficked. With the Nigerian police, I was not raped by the Nigerian police, but I have met people who have been raped, by the Nigerian police, by officers of the Nigerian police. And with me, with them, the Abuja Environmental Protection Board and the soldiers, the men of the Nigerian army, even also the Nigerian police, in the Abuja raids, I was groped, my breasts were groped, and then there was an incident where the man put his hand into my trousers, and in the process, he pulled out my pubic hair. And so, yes, that's sexual violence, and it is totally unacceptable. And I'm aware that these things are made to make women to feel less of a human, and, just let people do whatever they want. And that made me, say enough is enough. I went around documenting stories of other people who were victims of the same violations, and ended up proceeding to the ECOWAS Court of Justice, where we got a landmark judgment, that was given by the ECOWAS Court of Justice. And so, how does it make me feel? I'm glad I didn't listen to people say you're just a woman and you're fighting systems. It is human beings that make up systems. It is human beings that define how systems function. Everything that exists today is there are things that we have permitted And so for people like me that have stood up to say certain things are not permissible in our spaces, that gives reason why we have come up with, that gives reason why we've achieved the landmark ECOWAS court judgment. And you see what, shortly after that judgment, because what made it landmark was the fact that the Maputo Protocol was pronounced in the judgment for the first time ever. Shortly after that, within a few months, there was yet another court judgment by the ECOWAS court that pronounced the same Maputo Protocol in judgment. And so you see, more of us females are able to latch up to legal frameworks to seek, to get legal redress for injustices done us. And this has spiraled down in so many ways. Now we have, after the court judgment came out in 2017, there were still the Abuja raids in 2019, in which victims of the raid told of how pure water sachets, the nylon bags that are used in packaging water for drinking, were used as condoms to rape people that were abducted off the streets, women that were abducted off the streets. And so the women have proceeded to court, and they're leaning on the strength of cases like, the Dorothy Njemanze and 3 others versus the Federal Republic of Nigeria case. And there was also another court judgment that came out on the 19th of December 2019, ruled by Justice Binta, in which she made it clear that prostitution, for instance, is not a crime known to law in Nigeria. And so people could not go about harassing women on grounds of eradicating prostitution, because of course it violates the rights of women to associate with whoever they deem fit, and it also encroaches on the rights of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, where women need to consent to whoever they want to have sexual activity with. So it makes people think that it's okay to come in and try to figure out, or try to dictate to women how many people women are supposed to be sexually involved with, or make women need to account for how many people they think women are being sexually involved with. So what was happening pretty much was that women were being labeled prostitutes just so that violations kept on happening, and sex crimes were being used to shut women down, because fear of stigmatization was not making so many people speak up. I am happy I spoke up. Yeah. No matter how many more times I'm arrested, I will keep speaking up.
Wow.
Okay. Look, Dorothy, the question that I wanted to ask you, we've seen recently, not more than a month or so, the high profile, the case that, went viral, the case of Uwa Omozua, the young lady, the first-year student in University of Benin that allegedly went into a church, the Redeemed Christian Church of God in Ikoba Hill in Benin City, the capital of Edo State, and she was killed, raped and killed, and her skull was crushed with a fire extinguisher by some men in Benin. We've also seen the case of Jennifer, and then the young lady in Lagos that was, in the effort of the police to ensure social distancing, they shot this young 16-year-old girl dead. Now, the question I wanted to ask you, because I know that you're very much involved in the rights of women and protecting women, not only from sexual violence, but any kind of violence. What have you as an organization done to support the prosecution of the police officers in the case of the girl in Lagos, or the gentleman who has allegedly been arrested because we're told that there are more than 2 people who raped Uwa? What have you guys done so far to ensure that prosecution is secured in these key cases, these painful tragedies that have led to the loss of life of these young women?
Okay, so the cases you have mentioned are just few of the many cases that exist. That's the reality of it. I work with the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation. It's a survivor-run, not-for-profit organization, and we're first responders to sexual and gender-based violence. I can tell you authoritatively that pre-COVID-19, it was a disaster. The response protocols to sexual and gender-based violence was a disaster. Sexual and gender-based violence is pretty much not seen as an emergency in Nigeria, and so it's not treated as an emergency. And so the loss of lives at the time, perhaps if the world was not as, if the world was as busy as it used to be pre-COVID, we would not have heard the full details of the Uwa case. Many people were stuck in their houses and glued to the internet. And so that's how many people happen to have gotten the full details of, you know, these gory, people, as like many people would say, women's story. And at that point, it became evident to them that it wasn't woman's story, it was human story. And the repeat of the violence, you know, was easier to see and to take in because it was all up in our faces all the time. Very important is the fact that those were just isolated cases. So what did we do? We hit the streets. We said enough is enough. We can't sit down and keep counting deaths of human beings, because what seemed to have happened was the fact that human beings had been reduced to mere numbers. You know, 2 dead, 1 dead, lady in Benin dead, Barakat. So we're tired of the hashtags that were that were trending. The hashtags are not going to fix the systems. If the systems are not in place to protect human beings, then we'll keep on having more casualties. And so we took to the streets. There was the birth of the hashtag state of emergency GBV. You know, that's hashtag state of emergency gender-based violence. And we started calling on the government to, as a matter of urgency, declare a state of emergency on sexual and gender-based violence. The reason is because without appropriate legal frameworks, a lot of people's hands are tied. And then the cost of justice in Nigeria, the cost of assessing justice in Nigeria is extremely expensive. I'll give a very typical example that I'm known to give. If a 2-year-old is raped, and I use this example of a 2-year-old because we all know how much 2-year-olds earn worldwide. Truth about it is nothing, because what the 2-year-olds know that they're going to earn money, you know, except maybe celebrity babies whose pictures, you know, are making the rounds. If a 2-year-old gets raped, the 2-year-old is expected to pay for the medicals of the 2-year-old, because baseline medical analysis has to be done. And then the same medical analysis has to be done on the rapist or rapists. So the 2-year-old is expected to pay for the cost of the rapist or rapists. And then the 2-year-old is expected to pay for police to accompany to get the medicals done. That's the transportation cost of the police to accompany to and fro to get the medicals done. The 2-year-old is expected to pay for inquiry fee for police to listen to you and know if your case is worth taking in. The 2-year-old is supposed to pay for buy a file, a case file, which is usually an average of 3,000 naira. The 2-year-old is expected to pay the police for cost of investigation, you know, visit to the crime scene. Recently, we paid on a case for visit to the crime scene. It's an average of 5,000 naira actually for visit to the crime scene payment. The same 2-year-old, if the matter is minuted to legal, is expected to pay the police prosecutor an average of 5,000 naira per appearance. And it's important to point out here that a lot of these cases take years. And the same 2-year-old, if the matter is, if the accused is remanded in prison custody by the court, is expected to pay usually an average of 5,000 naira many times to the officers of the Nigerian prisons, whose vehicles are actually on the premises to take the accused to the prison, and also is expected to give periodic monies or monetary pay periodically for the prison officials to produce the accused from the prison to court whenever needed. So this is the burden on a 2-year-old. And this tells us how that sexual and gender-based violence was never treated as an emergency. 1% of consolidated revenue funds, according to the National Health Act, is supposed to be geared at providing emergency services, paying for emergency services. And this is an opening, it's a window to take care of the bills of sexual and gender-based violence. But never has that been implemented in the budget of Nigeria. And so we don't have budgetary allocations for taking care of that as an emergency. The police, the fact that the police, the cost of investigations and prosecution of cases lies on the victim is a huge barrier, because many times perpetrators rally around to find any amount of money just so that the police give them soft landing, or actually throw out the case, mess up the case so much that there can be nothing left to prosecute. And when we're talking about law enforcement, it's important to point out here the multiplicity of law enforcement that human beings have to interface with. It's not only the police. In some places, it's the religious police, the Hizbah, for instance, that people have to interface with. In some places, it is civil defense, and in some places, it's NAPTIP, the National Agency for against the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. Now, are there standard operational practices for addressing sexual and gender-based violence when reported? These are critical questions. Primarily with the police. I keep on using the police because the police seems to be like the first port of call when a crime is committed, right? What we see largely is that these crimes are trivialized and called family matter. Armed robbery is never called family matter, even when you know who the armed robber is, even when you know he's the son of your neighbor. It's never called family matter, even when you know he's your brother's son or he's your son. It's never called family matter. It's treated as a crime against the state. So why crimes that endanger the lives of women, children, and persons with disabilities will be reduced to family matter, as again seen as the ingredients of crime as they should, I would never understand. And these things are never treated as crime until they lead to the loss of a life. And so these are the reasons why the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act were enacted in the first instance. There's the Child Rights Act, there's the Disability Rights Act. And now with the influence of cyber crimes, that there are a lot of sexual crimes that are done with the internet, the Anti-Cyber Crimes Act come relevant. But do we have law enforcement, implementing the provisions of this? No. Even when we have written to law enforcement so many times, we have gotten turned down. At this point, I'd like to commend NAPTIP very specially, because NAPTIP has done a lot, is deliberately trying to bridge the gap when it comes to response to sexual and gender-based violence. But NAPTIP needs to be strengthened. NAPTIP's goodwill needs to be supported by financial wherewithal. NAPTIP's goodwill needs to be supported by more resources deliberately, otherwise NAPTIP will get run down. Goodwill does not sustain the needful when it comes to response to sexual and gender-based violence. With the Nigerian police, everybody is not corrupt. Nonetheless, if we don't have defined standard operational practices, if we don't have where people can get reported using the internet and get swift response, of course there's a CRU, the Critical Response Unit, but so many times, many people have complained about response using the CRU. It's important for us to have people who have erred by way of trivializing sexual and gender-based violence or family matter publicly tried. We want to see them publicly tried. We want to see public examples that people can latch up to have the impetus to take action against erring police officers. We want to see family members of victims that opt to settle these cases of these crimes as family matter, out of court. We want to see them, penalized. Lagos State is doing a lot along that line. Lagos State has the mandatory reporting policy, and then if you try to withdraw cases of violence, especially against minors, there's community service at least that can be done. So we need
just
to
one second, Dorothy,
yes.
Just a second. The specific one that I wanted to also speak to, and perhaps, I can see that you guys have done so much and you continue to do a lot as the foundation. But the case of Uwa, for example, what has happened?
Yes.
Has anybody been prosecuted today? Because she was killed, she's dead.
Well,
one person was arrested. What has happened?
with the case of Uwa, investigations are still going on. It is said that fingerprints from the crime scene led to some people. I'm wondering what database we have that's, you know, and how the fingerprints were collected. And I remember how compromised the crime scene was, because different people came into the crime scene and were touching different things all over the place and taking pictures. And so the integrity of the crime scene comes to question. You know, has anything been done? Nothing that I'm aware of to be proud of, aside the fact that the police says the police is on top of it. Now, the matter has been moved to Abuja for investigations. And the implication of this is that the statements of the people would have to be obtained in Abuja. The cost of this usually lies on the family. Maybe it will be different now for Uwa's family because the matter has been blown up. And part of what was blown up in the matter is the fact that money was requested when a police report was made. And so maybe, just maybe, it will be different. But cases don't have to hit the internet and go viral before there is a semblance of access to justice for, you know, for victims of sexual and gender-based violence.
Okay,
so is anything happening now to the best of my knowledge?
Yeah, Dorothy,
Okay.
maybe
Gotcha.
if you could help us understand as well. I mean, you shed a lot of light in terms of what the limitations are and the constrictions are in terms of having justice fully served in cases of sexual violence. What are you fighting here as Dorothy Njemanze Foundation? Where do you take the battleground? Because we want to find out exactly how, in the end, prosecutions can happen, because as we are aware, there have not been a lot of prosecutions for rape victims in the past.
Okay, what are we fighting for in the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation is to have recognition of the fact that sexual and gender-based violence is an emergency, and to have appropriate victim-centered response to sexual and gender-based violence. We need the burden of access to justice taken off from the victims. We need some responsibility on the side of the government to support victims, to build systems that punish perpetrators and support victims. A lot of our systems are, you know, interested in punishing perpetrators, but what comes out for the benefit of the victims is not existent. So you have domestic violence situations and the woman has left and the case is in court for God knows how long, if it would ever make it to court. But what kind of support is available to the woman in that situation? You know, housing needs, absolutely no support is available to the women. You know, sometimes they need scholarships for the children, at least for the first year or 2 years. You know, we don't have those things going on. So real-time support for victims is currently missing. And in the event somebody should report a case at night, for instance, if it's not within civil service hours, which will be between 9 a.m. on Monday morning, okay, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Mondays to Fridays. If it's not within civil service hours, most likely you will hear, just go to the nearest police station. And then going to the nearest police station would mean you maybe would have to sleep by the police counter, because where else are you going to sleep? And so the indignity that exists, you know, with response to sexual and gender-based violence further traumatizes or re-traumatizes victims of sexual and gender-based violence. And so Dorothy Njemanze Foundation is out to ensure that the proper thing is done to ensure that human dignity of victims of sexual and gender-based violence is restored. I'll give you a typical example of something we encountered. Last week, there was the rape of a 7-year-old that we were responding to. You would not believe it. We all saw the rapist. His hair was golden brown, and it was a punk hairstyle with lines, you know, designed on it. By the next day we came, every hair on his head had been shaved. Every strand of hair on his head had been shaved. And the little girl was asked, is this the person that raped you? Even us, the adults, were struggling to recognize this person. The face looks the same, but the hair that was missing was an alteration to the crime scene, which is the body of the rapist. And the child struggled, but said, yes, this is the person. And then they said to her, but you're not even behaving like a child that was raped. Children that are raped cannot look into the eyes of their perpetrators. That's a very big anomaly. Do I also talk of the divisional police officer that told me that as far as he was concerned, I had made him to sin against his God by insisting that a man who beat his wife until she bled, be sent away from the house because my client wasn't safe as long as he was in the house. He said, you mean you want me to send away the head of the home? He stopped being head of the home when he became a violent person. The need to protect women. So that idea that law enforcement officers come up with when they say the police is not designed to break marriages. Excuse me, the police is designed to protect life and property of human beings. So marriage is inconsequential when life and property of human beings are endangered. The first duty of law enforcement is to protect life and property of human beings. And so we need this reorientation. We do as much as we can to reorientate people, to remind people of the rights. Okay, see, during the COVID-19 in Nigeria, we didn't have the gender lens applied to the response to COVID-19. So when palliatives were being rolled out, we did not see sanitary pads because girls and women were still menstruating but could not move around. Remember, initially we thought the lockdown would be for 2 weeks. So if anybody said, oh, no need to buy sanitary pads, the lockdown would be for just 2 weeks, it meant that the person would have needed sanitary pads. We did not see contraceptives as part of the palliatives. The refusal of women to have unsafe sex with their boyfriends and husbands accounted very largely for a lot of violence that was meted out on women. A lot of men were so idle that they kept demanding for sex daily, whether women were menstruating or they were not menstruating. And so at least contraceptives may have helped a lot of women consider, participating in sex. The normal thing to do, because you're the bearer of the pregnancy, is to hold your ground and insist, no, sex is not happening because it's not safe. That's the normal thing to do, and that's a proper thing to do. We also did not have diapers that made it to the palliatives because children needed diapers, adults who use diapers did need diapers, but instead people were giving rice and beans because these are things that men needed. So the contents of the palliatives that were given out were based on things that a man would need or boys would need, the basic things that boys would need. So women could do whatever they wanted.
So,
we had so many people.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Look, the question that given this very painful picture that you paint, the plight of women, of course, if it's the plight of women in Nigeria, by extension, it figures that it would be the plight of women across Africa. In fact, some countries in Africa are still, in terms of development, economy, they're still far behind Nigeria. What do you think the international community can do?
Yes.
Given that you've had some of this international recognition, what do you think the international community can do in order to assist Nigerians to prosecute rape? Because it's become a very big problem. As you said, you guys are trying to get some emergency action on the part of government. Firstly, what do you think the international community can do? Secondly, I know that there are a lot of powerful women in Nigeria. They're senators, they're House rep. Well, we don't have governors who are women. We surely have commissioners. And we have a lot of women in the private sector who are doing very, very well in Lagos, in Abuja, and Port Harcourt. What do you think these groups of people, the international and then those powerful women, what do you think they can do to assist in ensuring that rape, the scourge of rape, is dealt with?
Okay, well, the best influence anybody in power can have is for your leadership to be felt. That's the truth about it. So with what the international community can do to help with the scourge of rape in Nigeria, I would request that, you know, building strong systems is something the international community can help to do. A lot of money is being invested into seminars and workshops and summits. And these things do not really have direct bearing on the victims. And so if the money that is targeted at strengthening the legislation around sexual violence, for instance, you know, is divided to include monies that, you know, funds that can, you know, directly support victims, then we'll be making impact. But when you're speaking a lot of English or whatever the language is you're speaking, and it doesn't have direct bearing on the people. Remember, I talked about how if something happens to a woman by 7 p.m., you know, there's no place of dignity that she can be in, you know, or get real-time response. And sometimes if it happens on a weekday, you know, on a weekend, she has to wait till early Monday. So we need to get to to that place where we have real-time response for victims.
I know that there's this powerful senator by the name of Senator Dino Melaye. About a year ago, 2 years ago, he threatened that he was going to break Senator Oluremi Tinubu on the floor of the Senate. And he said that nothing will happen. And he also called a dry fish. And then he went to Lagos and walked on Bodilon on the streets where the lady's husband, the powerful Senator Ahmed Bola Tinubu, former governor of Lagos, lives in Bodilon. What's your take on that situation? What happened? Did anything happen to him?
Well, when it comes to the names that you called, particularly, I want to believe a lot of us Nigerians have our reservations. You know, the same lady is somebody who was on the panel, the committee that was supposed to investigate Elisha Abo. And so it tells us how much moral decadence is in the leadership. There are certain things, anything that has to do with sexual and gender-based violence or you know, enthroning sexual and gender-based violence, or, you know, praising it or justifying it or enabling it, I totally and strongly condemn it, whether it is by our actions or our inactions. You know, actions could be those what you have said that people can quote you on, or inactions, which include refusal to take action where there is obvious sexual and gender-based violence. I mean, up till today, instead of bringing Elisha Abo to book publicly about, you know, for beating up the woman in the sex toy shop, he's given awards. He's trying, you know, there are different attempts to eulogize the symbol of violence, who is Elisha Abo. And with those kind of things, you know, we sit back and complain about law enforcement trivializing sexual and gender-based violence. They see the leadership do these things. So we need the people in leadership to, you know, walk the talk and stop using us for photo ops and stop sharing stories of how we were sexually violated or whatever and pretending like it matters to them. We need to see people that are in official position brought to book, you know, when they violate other people. Currently in Kogi State, the Commissioner for Water Resources, Abdulmumin Danga, you know, is under fire for the violations he did to Elizabeth Oyeni. I commend the Nigerian police for what the police has done with the Danga case. The Inspector General of Police personally saw to it that the Danga case was not swept under the carpet. The Kogi State government kept shielding Abdulmumin Danga, but just before he was declared wanted by the Inspector General of Police, he produced himself. And so these kind of things, you know, are the deliberate things that we want to see happen when people in high places, are party to sexual and gender-based violence, whether they're enablers of the violence or they're apologists of such violence. There should be consequences for their actions as well.
Dorothy, I wanted to ask, I mean,
Sorry,
I think in our culture as African people, there's tendencies for women, in fact, to, in some cases, not, give enough respect to issues of women's rights, where, if it's in a family setup, if a woman has been abused, violently by her husband, the community comes around her and tells her, oh, you mustn't report your husband, you must try and work out the marriage. Let's talk about women's role in enabling issues of domestic and sexual violence.
For women's roles in enabling issues of sexual and domestic violence, we cannot rule out the influence of social conditioning of women. And it's largely linked to, patriarchal ideologies that, that make us believe that women should start counting in the room when the last man in the room is tired of, is tired of counting or doesn't want to be counted any longer. Now, whether people are males or they're females, I try to do one thing with all the work I do, whether as a journalist or a filmmaker or a human rights activist, and that's to remind us that we need to reconnect with being human, as against forcing ourselves to fit into boxes that are man-made boxes. So a lot of people are acting the role of man that they feel would make them look manly to society or look womanly to society, and forgetting to be human. On these grounds, I'm aware that a lot of culture is dynamic, and there are provisions for abolition of harmful traditional practices, right? So whether you hide under religion or you hide under whatever it is, I'm aware that the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act in Nigeria, for instance, sees harmful traditional practices as a crime known to law with defined penalties. And so my question would be, to what extent has the government enabled people to be able to take legal action against whoever is harming them? The government cannot do everything directly, but the government can create the enabling environment for every individual affected by every situation to do the right thing. And so, what can women do? Women can count. Women can remember that they're human beings with human rights that are inalienable. Women can keep on calling for equal rights of women, as equal rights and opportunities for women as the men have. Women can keep rejecting every list released by whatever the by whatever the political position, whether it's a governor or it's the president or it's whoever. Any list that does not have equal representation of men as it does of women, or at least 35% of the list should be of of either gender. Minimum of 35% of the list should be of either gender, meaning as against an all females list, we should have at least 35% representation of men. As against an all men's list, we should have at least 35% representation of females. And anytime any list is reduced, recently a list of ambassadorial nominees was released, and we didn't have up to 35% representing females. That is totally unacceptable. We need to see willpower on the part of the government to ensure that women's voices are present on the table, so that the government doesn't keep getting it wrong. The government got it very, very, very wrong. Harmfully wrong, that it's led to losses of lives in Nigeria, when during the presidential task force for COVID-19, voices of women were not present enough on the decision-making table. And as long as that keeps happening, more lives will be lost in Nigeria. So women need to count simply because they're human beings. And the reason men count on tables is simply because they're human beings. So our human rights must not be taken for granted, and there should be very strict penalties, you know, for any opportunity, for any attempt to violate our human rights.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. You've said powerful statements you've made. I saw that list. What you'll be happy to know is that I'm a powerful champion voice for women. I don't like this man-man thing. In fact, 36 governors in Nigeria, all men. The president is a man, the vice president is a man, the deputy speaker is a man, the speaker is a man, the senate president is a man, the deputy senate president is a man, the chief justice of Nigeria is a man, the inspector general of police is a man, the head of customs is a man, the minister of foreign affairs is a man. In fact, everything in Nigeria is a man. I call it, they have a man bina, not a webinar, men bina. But with those words, I must thank you, and we will continue in our way as media to support what you do. We will bring you back in Women's Month. Women in August is Women's Month in South Africa. We need more Nigerian women to be visible in South Africa. There are Nigerian women who are doing very well here, but they're not visible, especially in the media. We're encouraging them to come out because there are more Nigerian women than there are any other African women on the face of the earth. So I thank you. And so with those words from Afrospace, I'll say my goodbye. Odabo, Kachifo, Segobe, until next time.
All right, and for me, Nyasha Grace, I'll say Sarai Jokanaka Kwaheri.
Thank you. And Melaye, thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you so much.
Well done. Good luck.